Hello and welcome to the Capital Games Movie Club. I am the Wiz. Zero is out right now. If you haven't heard, he's secretly the actual GTA 6 leaker. Oh, sorry, Zero. Have fun hanging out in the UAE, I guess. But yeah, I'm here and we are going to be discussing the 2022 MCU film Thor: Love and Thunder, starring Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, Tessa Thompson, and Christian Bale. Okay, non-spoilers at this point. I did not like this movie at all. In fact, I guess I'll just come out right out with from Front Street here on this. This came very close to being the worst MCU movie. It edged it out ever so slightly from Thor: The Dark World. This was a mess, essentially, in this one. Thor: Love and Thunder basically took what here's my interpretation, okay? I think it took what the filmmakers thought were the strengths of Ragnarok, which was I guess what they're thinking was the comedy. Turn it up to 11 and throw characterization out the window to a certain extent, which in some instances that could work, but it doesn't work very well with the character of Thor and with his previous exploits. Thor, if you remember, has some tragedy in his backstory. The murdering of his family, of Loki, things like that throughout. And to turn him essentially into a quippy doofus, I mean, he had some quips, some funny things in Thor Ragnarok, but what made Ragnarok, in my opinion, work was that you were used to having this character who was pretty serious and, you know, and was to be taken seriously to a certain extent, and is thrown into maybe sometimes a crazy situation, but also is given like little flourishes of comedy that were unexpected. And I think that was the strength of Ragnarok. They didn't go all out in the comedy. It was still a serious movie. I mean, in fact, if I recall correctly, Asgard was destroyed in Ragnarok to a certain at the end of that movie. So it was still grounded in some seriousness, but they added enough comedic touches to the movie where it didn't feel as much of a slog like Thor: The Lost World, or maybe not as bland as the original Thor. Even though I liked the original Thor, I will admit it's kind of bland. But we'll pass through that. The big issue I had with Thor: Love and Thunder is just the tone, because they just went hyper comedic, lots of quips, lots of gags, a lot like they really went heavily comedic in this movie, and I do not think it worked at all, especially when you're dealing with, let's say, a villain that is considered a god killer in Gore the God Butcher, and a potentially tragic subplot, which I'll get to in spoilers, involving one of the characters. So it really felt way off with what they were doing in Thor: Love and Thunder when it comes to the story and the characters involved. Now, some circles were not happy with the fact that they were essentially turning Thor into a side character in the movie, which I'll say, if you haven't seen the movie, that's not really the case. That's what happens in this. And I kind of liked where they were going with the Thor, Mighty Thor, Jane Foster angle that they were going here. Well, it's not really a spoiler because they really went into it in the marketing. Basically what happens is Jane Foster, who was the old flame from the first two Thors, becomes now the Mighty Thor and now uses Mjolnir to fight bad guys. It's essentially what happens. Again, this could have been done really well, I think, more in a dramatic sense, where you have this dichotomy where Thor has to battle with his insecurities, and deal with the person that he still loves, and also deal with the fact that maybe maybe not his masculinity, but maybe his purpose is being questioned because Mjolnir no longer finds him worthy, even though he has a worthy weapon with himself and Stormbreaker. Well, we'll throw that out there, but anyway, there could have been something very interesting in that, but then they played it for comedy again on this, and the comedy just didn't work. There were gags with the other weapon that Thor had as being jealous, which I just thought did not work and was pretty damn lame when I was watching it. I wouldn't so much call it a cringe fest as something that just really, it really didn't. I don't think that the execution that they had on this really worked with what they went for in Thor Love and Thunder, especially when it came to the comedy. There are some chuckle-worthy moments, I guess, but nothing too out loud hilarious. Let's get into performances real quick. I mean, Chris Hemsworth is Chris Hemsworth and Thor in this. I mean, that's nothing new. I mean, it's not. It's a standard Thor performance. He does nothing really exceptional in this. And I don't know if it was... I think it was the writing's fault in this and not more of Chris Hemsworth in this. But the comedy didn't really bounce off very well when it came to Chris Hemsworth's performance. I think that's the writing more than Chris Hemsworth on this. But yeah, I didn't really like that very much. Natalie Portman was actually pretty good as Jane Foster. I'll get to spoilers and to more detail with what she did. They gave Jane Foster more to do in this, so that's good because she's a very capable actress and she'd do a lot more than what she did in the first two Thors. But yeah, it was good, but not great. Tessa Thompson's good. She's likable as Valkyrie. I heard that they were going to probably do more with Valkyrie in the future. I hope they do. I hope they try more in this. I have to give a big thumbs down to Russell Crowe as Zeus in this. Russell Crowe has a small scene in the film where he plays the god Zeus. I never thought I'd see the day where I realized that Russell Crowe might have limited range. But then again, I did watch the Les Miserables movie in 2012, and man, couldn't sing. Oh my God. But, yeah, I mean, he had this really terrible accent throughout the entire movie. And I guess you gotta do something different with when you're going to be Zeus, but man, did it sound terrible. Like, it was nails on chalkboard bad. Like, it was really painful to listen to. I want to highlight Christian Bale's performance as Gore the God Butcher, though. His performance is good, and Christian Bale is a very capable actor, and he could have been, I think, the thing that made this movie a lot better if they gave him more time, but they didn't. They barely had him in the movie. I think he was in it for like maybe 20, 25 minutes. And the idea of Gore is interesting and could be made into an interesting type of villain. But like I said, they didn't give him much time. And they did some visual flourishes to show like how scary he is, but you can only go so far without giving the character more time in this. So I think it's a good performance by Bale, but he was not given much, or a lot of the stuff was cut from his performance. So that stinks. I would have actually liked to see more of Christian Bale. As for the direction of Taika Waititi, he is talented. I mean, and he did a very good job in Ragnarok. But I just feel like he took the wrong lessons from Ragnarok and put it into Love and Thunder. Because, people found the comedy funny in Ragnarok, no doubt. And I did too. But Ragnarok still was very grounded in the purpose it was trying to do, and what it was trying to do. It was meant to be. It was not meant to be as serious as the other Thor movies, because a lot of people found them kind of boring, especially Dark World, which I agree with. That I didn't like Dark World at all. But to go a complete 180 from deathly serious to screwball comedy, and just being outright ridiculous at times with taglines and with like screwball comedy and stuff like that. It didn't fit well with this. I believe it didn't really fit well at all. And I think they should have taken better lessons from Ragnarok and realized that it was the blend of the two. Because you also had the subplot with Ragnarok involving Hulk as well, and how tragic what the tragic things that were going on with him. So they added some more of that, and I guess they kind of tried in this one with Jane Foster, but it didn't work quite as well. But yeah, I mean it's sad. Like I think this would have been a very interesting, different film that could have went a better direction, I feel. But I think overall it kind of failed at this. The cinematic theming, the visual themes of the film, they're okay. The use of 80s rock and a lot of 80s imagery, especially in the... if you watch the teasers and the posters, they look like 80s style metal albums to a certain extent. And the visual representation of, like, say, Gore's world, or the Shadow Realm, I guess, was interesting enough to, I guess, but it didn't really add very much to the film, I think. It just felt like to me that it was just a visual motif that made it visually interesting but didn't add much else to it, which is a shame, because there is a decent story in here that could have been done very well, but I think the tone at which they were going on in Thor: Love and Thunder just it just didn't work for me. And I just sat there watching the movie questioning a lot of why they did what they did. And that's not what you want in a film when you are trying to enjoy the film, saying, why did they do this? Why did they go this route? Why that decision? That was a constant thing that was going on throughout the entire film. The outline of the story was interesting, but the execution, I think, left a lot to be desired. And I think at this point, it's sad, because this actually had a decent story behind it that could have been interesting, but I think they really failed on the execution, essentially. So why don't we get into spoilers at this point? If you haven't seen Thor: Love and Thunder and are interested in seeing it, why don't you go ahead and stop now, watch the movie, and come back, and when you're ready, you can listen to the spoilers. And on that note, we will get started in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so now that we're at spoilers, let me talk about Jane Foster, okay? When I read and heard that Jane Foster was going to be the new Thor, I had questions. How does she exactly become worthy in the eyes of Mjolnir? What exactly did she do to deserve, what did she do to deserve that? How are they going to do the plot line between Thor and Jane Foster? Is it going to be a Mary Sue situation, essentially, where she is because she is woman, and that's that? That's not what happened in this movie, but it's not that better, to be completely honest. So basically the conceit of the film is that Jane Foster's dying of cancer. She has stage 4 cancer, and doesn't have much time. But she reads a book that tells her that Mjolnir can give great health to the person who's wearing it. And that leads her to seek out Mjolnir in New Asgard to get the hammer and to, I guess, feel better without dealing with her dying of cancer. And that's interesting. That was an interesting, I think, kind of way of marrying her to the hammer. But then it asks the question, what exactly did she do to deserve it? And I think they could have went somewhere with it by saying something along the lines of, well, she was willing to sacrifice her health to make the world a better place. And that could have worked. And that really could have actually worked very well, but they didn't go that route. They actually didn't go into any specific explanation as to why the hammer picked her. It did. And that's it. So I was like, okay, fine, I guess. But it's those who are basically saying this is a Mary Sue situation. I do have to disagree with that, mainly because in a Mary Sue situation, they wouldn't explain anything. They wouldn't give her any weaknesses. They would make her all strengths and essentially make her a boring character, which she's not. She's not a boring character. It's an interesting character where basically you find out throughout the film that the hammer's killing her to a certain extent. I mean, and they could have done a lot more with that. And the exposition dumped that fact that the hammer is essentially killing her. Basically, there's no dramatic kind of storytelling that tells you what the hammer is essentially doing to her and what her internal monologue and feelings are as to why she's doing this. And it kind of hurts the character to a certain extent, and that's unfortunate. It really is, because it would have been really interesting, and it could have been done really well to have, I guess, her character, for her character go through this whole arc throughout the film. And it would have, and I think it would have been done well, in fact, if, like, I'll put it this way. If they did what people were worried about in this movie and made Thor Odinson, Chris Hemsworth, the side character, and Natalie and Jane Foster's character to be the main focus, the one that drives the film throughout, I kind of would have been fine with that, because then we would get to learn more about maybe the hammer's effects and what this does to actual human beings and stuff like that. Like, I think I would have been strangely okay with that. But they didn't go that route, and they kind of half-assed it throughout the way, and it hurt. It hurt the character of Jane Foster. It hurt the end, because you were supposed to have this really dramatic thing that happens in the film. Well, spoilers. Well, Jane Foster dies at the end of the movie, and you're supposed to have this really emotional reaction to what happened to her, and I didn't get that. I didn't feel that emotional reaction. And it's also mainly because of what they decided to do what they decided to do in terms of tone in the film. Because they would go absolute slapstick wacky and then suddenly deathly serious with no in between. It would ping pong back and forth. It didn't fit real well in this. And I would understand if, to a certain extent, maybe if they just went more comedic and had a more comedic villain on top. But then you can't have these ultra serious tones and ultra serious things like Jane Foster dying of cancer and Gore and his issue with killing gods and why he wants to. Those need more time and more of a serious, how do I put this? They need more time, and they need more of a serious investment to flesh them out and make them believable and make them, in a sense, enjoyable, or not maybe enjoyable, but give them the impact that that story and that character deserved. I think they shortchanged Jane Foster in the end, which I found honestly kind of strange, because they made a huge deal about this in the run-up, that she was going to be the mighty Thor, and this is the female Thor, and this is the future, and this and that, and they bungled it big time in this. I feel, at least. I know there's people who are fans of this, but I feel they bungled that chance in this, and they could have made her admittedly tragic story into a very memorable story that could, in the end, made Thor a more compelling character. But I really feel they messed that up. And because they messed it up, and because they didn't stick the landing very well, it's going to be weird when they do another Thor movie, when they have to also balance that he also lost the love of his life. My feeling is, unless they go another different route with Thor, which they might, they may just forget about it to a certain extent, not even get into it, which, again, would just hurt the character of Thor. And that would not be good in that situation. I mentioned Christian Bale's performance is good as Gore, but they didn't give much screen time to his character. And that, I think, that also hurt the villain and hurt the movie overall, because, yeah, you get this feeling of how much of a monster this person is. But the most compelling villains, I mean, except for someone like the Joker, the most compelling villains are the ones that you identify with to a certain extent. And you get the one scene where you understand Gore's motivation, but you don't get much more out of that. And they just go into classic movie monster territory with Gore, which is a shame, because you have this really talented actor in Christian Bale playing, and I'll be honest, I've never heard of Gore until they announced this movie, but it seemed like an interesting different type of villain they could have went with, but they missed the mark on this. I think they missed the mark pretty badly. When we finally meet Russell Crowe's Zeus, man, do I have to tell you how badly this is directed in this. I don't know if the accent was Russell Crowe's decision, or if it was the decision of the writer or director, or which is Taika Waititi. But man, did they blow that. They turned Zeus from someone who is supposed to be incredibly intimidating and one of the most powerful gods out there into a freaking goofball. Into a flubby, disgusting goofball. And I get, to a certain extent, that's the tone of the movie. It's supposed to be taken much less seriously. But then you're told that this is one of the most powerful gods out there. Why then turn him into that, to a certain extent? Again, that's more of a problem of execution. And that's like the whole problem with the movie. The execution's bad. The execution just didn't work. The comedy and the over-reliance of it just didn't fit well with this. Because, and I'll end it with this, with the spoilers. Thor is supposed to be a serious character. He is. And what made Ragnarok work very well is they took this very serious character and sprinkled personality and humor into it, but still kept him as the character he is in the movie. And that's what made that's what made Thor Ragnarok work. Now, I haven't seen Thor Ragnarok in about 4 years. I might be misremembering things. I might be wrong. We'll see. But in this, they turned him more and more into a goofy caricature like hero. Like, they kind of turned him into, well, Star-Lord to a certain extent. If Star-Lord was a god, this is what Thor is, essentially. And it did not work at all. And I think that does a graver disservice to the character than anything. If they're going to continue using Thor in the MCU, which actually is another question I might have, maybe they shouldn't continue using Thor. Maybe they should put him to the side for a little while. until they can come up with something a lot better. Since, if I heard correctly, Taika Waititi is not doing another Thor movie, which I think might be the best decision in this. But I think they had a decent grounding of the character. They had a template to use. But then they threw away the template and said, well, people like this, so we'll just give them all of that. When really, that's not exactly what happened. They liked what they did, but they liked the in my opinion, they liked that they sprinkled it on. That they put little bits of that comedic flair and touch in it. Instead of basically bombarding you with the comedic bits, which I don't think a lot of people were asking for, and I wasn't really asking for either. It could have worked if they executed it properly, but they just didn't, and it just fell flat. And yeah, that's it on that one. So now that we're done with the spoilers, I'll get to my final thoughts. Thor: Love and Thunder is... I rated it already on my letterbox for the best MCU movies. It is now the second worst MCU movie that I've seen. Only the one that's lowest is Thor: The Dark World, which was awful. It had a bunch of tonal problems. The subplots they had were not fleshed out enough. Thor's turned into something wildly different, which doesn't really fit Thor very well, and it doesn't fit Chris Hemsworth's interpretation and performance of Thor. So then that's an issue. The look and feel of the movie's okay, but it goes in stark contrast of what's going on. The best way to put the visual motif is color vomit, I would say. It's really colorful. It's like a oh God, is it it's not Anne Frank. It's shit. It reminds me of those Trapper Keeper type of folders that girls in like the early 80s and 90s used to have, that were really colorful with unicorns, a lot of pink and bright blue and bright green and stuff like that. It's something Frank, and I'm missing it, and I'm sorry, but the color motif that they gave through the film reminds me of that specifically, and it just felt wildly off. Like, I watched it and went, why is this colorful? What's the point of this? And there was really no point of it other than it was crazy and colorful. So I had those issues as well. Good performances by the actors, even though they weren't given a lot to deal with. The character, I think they really bungled Jane Foster in this. Like, if they were going to turn her into the tragic character that they were really gunning for, they needed to spend more time on her. And they just didn't. And the movie suffered because of that. Out of 5, I gave it 1.5 stars. Again, it's the second worst MCU movie that I have seen. And it's a shame, because Thor Ragnarok was very good, I thought. I think Thor Ragnarok is like number 8 in the best MCU movies, in my opinion. But to go down that far, it is a travesty. And either they're going to have to reboot Thor once again in the next movie, or, in my opinion, they should just stop and just say, okay, maybe enough Thor this time. We'll get to him maybe in like 5 or 6 years, or 7 or 8 years. We'll do that instead. We'll see, though. But would I recommend it? No, I wouldn't. Even if you're a diehard MCU fan, and if you are, I'm sorry, you're going to watch it anyway. I really would not recommend this at all. I mentioned last week that I didn't have a question because I talked about my favorite MCU movies, but I completely forgot about something, and I'm sorry that I did, but I'll get to it now. The Criterion Collection announced the new movies for the month of December 2022. They do this on the 15th of every month, and I meant to do it a couple of episodes ago, and I'll be honest with you, I forgot. I completely forgot. So my bad on that one. So I think I will get into what the Criterion Collection announced for December. The first thing they announced was the Michael Haneke trilogy. This trilogy box set comes with The Seventh Continent, Benny's Video, and 71 fragments of a chronology of chance. I have seen a few of Michael Haneke's films. They're fantastic. They are really good. But they are deeply unsettling in certain aspects. And I've heard of Benny's Video and how unsettling that movie can be. So if you're interested in Michael Haneke, I would say that's a decent Blu-ray box set. I'm wondering why they chose the artwork that they did for the box set. Maybe there's a reason. So I won't comment too much on it, but it kind of looks kind of ugly, to be absolutely honest. But I would recommend, if you're not interested in the box set, but you want to check out Haneke's work, I would recommend The White Ribbon and Cachet. If you're not in the U.S., it's called Hidden elsewhere. I think it's called Hidden. But Cachet especially is a fantastic film. Deeply unsettling, though. But I think it is a great film by Michael Haneke. The next box set that they announced was 3 films by Maya Zetterling. And I have to be honest with you guys. I've never heard of Maya Zetterling. I never heard of this person. But, that's the thing about the Criterion Collection. If you're into the collection and what they release, they show you new things that you've never seen before, which is what makes the Criterion Collection exciting, along with all the special features and the artwork and everything that they give. So the movies that are in there are Loving Couples, Night Games, and The Girls. I've heard of Night Games, and I've heard of Night Games because, before I stopped pursuing my desire to be a film a legit film critic in a newspaper, I saw a bunch of films that are not pleasant to watch, kind of disturbing, kind of uncomfortable to watch. And Night Games is essentially about a person that explores his Oedipal relationship with his mother, I think is what it's about. So that was very controversial when it came out. It continues to be controversial. I mean, if you're talking about having sex with your mother, I guess that would do it. So, yeah, I mean, if you're into disturbing movies, I guess that might be something you could look into. The next one that was announced was The Velvet Underground. This is the documentary. It's a documentary by one of the better filmmakers out there, Todd Haynes. He directed this documentary about, let me see what it says, about rock and roll and about, let me read what it says. Emerging from the primordial soup of glamour, gutter sleaze, and feverish creativity that was New York's 1960s underground culture, the Velvet Underground redefined music with its at once raw and exalted blend of experimentation, art, damage, rock and roll. So yeah, it's a music documentary. I will say this, even if you're not fans of the music that is being placed on these documentaries, there are some fantastic documentaries about musicians and what they go through. I know the most popular one is Some Kind of Monster, the one from Metallica, which, yeah, that was good. It was pretty good. Martin Scorsese does a bunch of documentaries, like The Last Waltz. I think he did Don't Look Back. The Massales, Albert Massales did Gimme Shelter, which was a fantastic music documentary. Don't sleep on these if you want good documentaries, even if you're not interested in the artists themselves. But I'm a fan of Todd Haynes. I might check that out. I might actually give that a shot to see how that is. And finally, the last movie that was announced for December is Cooley High. This has been one that's been requested by a lot of people. And I am also ashamed to admit, I didn't really hear about this film until recently. Criterion Collection has been making a concerted effort to put more Black and African American filmmakers into the collection. And they've been doing a pretty good job, I would say. My fear was when they were making this concerted effort that they would make the wrong choices, that they would just take popular films from black creators, regardless of quality, and put them in there just to shut people up. But they didn't do that, which I think is fantastic. And I think they recently did Love and Basketball, which I haven't seen. Love Jones, which is good. Devil in a Blue Dress. They're going to do Malcolm X. Great, another Spike Lee movie. There is The Learning Tree. There is there are so many of them now that they're putting in, which is Menace to Society, another great one. They're making a very good effort to get really good African American and black films in there, which, you know what? Again, I haven't seen some of these films, but the way that the Criterion Collection looks for quality, I'll look forward to them and see how they do and see if they're good. So I'm all for it. To get more cultures and more Eve's Bayou is a great movie. If it means that getting more of these types of cultures and different types of groups of people get represented in a certain way, but are represented in a quality way, I'm all for it. So I'm totally okay with it. So that's good, and they're doing a good job. So people are happy with the decisions they're making. And yeah, that's great. So the 4 films that were announced for December were the Michael Haneke trilogy, 3 films by Maya Zetterling, The Velvet Underground, and Cooley High. I think I'm going to try and check Cooley High and maybe The Velvet Underground. My disturbing film quotient has run dry as of recently, so I might not check out the Michael Haneke trilogy or Night Moves, like that, the Night Games, I should say. That's not really what I'm interested in, but if it is for you, good for you. Good luck. But yeah, those are the ones that were announced for December. Next month will be January, and I'll look forward to what happens next for the Criterion Collection. All right, well, we are at the end of the episode, but as always, oh wait, Zero's not here, so I don't have a question for him. I'll have a question for myself. Yeah, there we go. Here is my question that I essentially saw on on Twitter specifically. It turned out, if for those of you, let me get into this. A long time ago, I was a big fan of Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith was very inspirational. I'm from New Jersey, and I fell in love. I really liked his film Chasing Amy when it came out. I wasn't so much of a fan of Mallrats. Mallrats was the first one I saw of his, and I did not like it. And I thought Clerks was okay. But then when I saw Chasing Amy, I thought, okay, this guy's got some serious talent as a writer. Like, he's very talented. And since then, when I learned about him and his story and him being from New Jersey and everything, he became somewhat of an inspiration. And I was like, wow, if this guy can do it without a high school diploma, and he's from places that I'm aware of, that I know of, that's inspirational. That's great. I would love to follow this guy. And I did for a long time. Like, he did a bunch of other films after Chasing Amy. He did Dogma, which I think was his most controversial. He did a very meta movie called Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and because I was a fan of his movies, I really liked Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. He also did the comedy Zack and Miri Made a Porno, and I think that's his funniest film. But as of recently, he has gone downhill. He went through a horror phase, and me not being a horror fan kind of turned me off. And I saw his films, and I didn't like them at all. So there's that. And then he did Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, and that was depressing to watch. I didn't laugh once in that movie. It was horrible. I don't know how I sat through it. I think maybe it was just the younger me who was saying, maybe it will get good, maybe it'll get better. but it didn't, and it was terrible. And Clerks 3 is getting okay reviews. I think fans of his are enjoying it, but I'm skeptical, so I'm going to watch Clerks 3 and see when that comes out on Blu-ray and see how that is. But a story came about involving Dogma. Dogma has a strange story in that basically you can't buy it or watch it anywhere. It is unavailable on Blu-ray. It's not available on 4K. No streaming site is streaming it right now. And it turns out it's because that the Weinsteins own the movie. It came out this week that the Weinsteins are asking for $5 million to sell the rights to Dogma. Okay? $5 million for a movie that, if I recall correctly, when it came out in theaters, I think it made a little bit more than that. Like, it didn't make a lot of money. I remember being in the theater, seeing that movie. It was packed, but I was also in Jersey when that happened, so that's why. So let me get the opening weekend was $8 million. Gross worldwide was $31 million at a $10 million budget. So that he actually made his money back and some. So okay, which I gotta tell you is rare for a Kevin Smith film. His films make no money essentially, but to ask for $5 million for Dogma, the question I would have that I guess a lot of people are asking is, would you, if you could, pay $5 million to get Dogma back? And do you think anyone would do it? If I had the money, no. I don't think I would. Dogma is an interesting film. It's a good film, but it really highlights the directorial problems of Kevin Smith. His inability to actually create a visually interesting film, even though writing-wise he had an interesting film that he was doing. It is a super flawed film. I like Dogma, but it is very flawed. And the problem now with Kevin Smith's brand of comedy right now is unless you are of the time at which it was popular or of the time at which that it was set, like if you can transport yourself and connect yourself to that, like for nostalgic reasons, I don't see many people enjoying Dogma and Kevin Smith films. So if I were to say, as a pure business decision, $5 million for Dogma is steep, because I don't think I'd get that money back, and that would be my catalyst of saying, would I pay for this license? Because I would get that back tenfold. I wouldn't get that back. That would be, to me, in my opinion, I don't think anybody, any production house, any studio, any label is going to purchase Dogma. Especially not for $5 million. $1 million maybe. Pushing it $2 million. But $5 million, no. I don't think so. Because they wouldn't get their money back. They would sell the DVD, the Blu-ray in 4K. They would spruce it up. They'd have to do a little bit of marketing, but not much. And Kevin Smith is good in his podcast to market himself. That's a strength he has. But you're talking about a small audience that's getting smaller by the day. And maybe you'd be able to get some people who were former fans going, oh, that's when Kevin Smith was good. Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and watch that. I'll go ahead and plunk $40 for a 4K and then sit down and realize, oh, this looks like shit. Like, I don't see anybody purchasing that for a business decision unless this situation happens. This would have to be a favor for favor kind of transaction, as in a studio would have to do a favor for Smith, and then Smith would have to do a favor in return for the studio. So let's say, I don't know, let's go wild. Let's say, let's do something stupid. Let's say that Warner Brothers Discovery says, you know what? We'll pay $5 million for it if Smith, we'll do this favor for you if you make a movie about a lesser-known DC property. Now, would they do that? No, they would not do that. They would not give Kevin Smith that type of property to do as a movie. That would be, I think, a bad idea. But that is what it would essentially take for Smith to get Dogma back. Unfortunately, and this sucks. I will admit, this is not. I don't like this. I don't like that it was going to come to this specifically, that no one's going to be able to watch a movie that people are fans of. People are fans of these movies, and it sucks when this happens. But the sad part is that if they're not going to get the money back for it, no one's going to buy it. And it's unfortunate, but it's the case, unfortunately. And this will be one of these movies that will be stuck in infinite limbo until maybe someone buys the Weinstein Company. And that's it. That's it. And there are other films that the Weinstein Company has that are in this kind of limbo, that people probably want to watch them again, but are unable to because they are literally stuck because it's in the Weinstein Company, and the Weinstein Company is such a toxic brand that no one even wants to touch it, and until maybe Harvey Weinstein dies, and Bob Weinstein sells it at a discount. That's, I think, the only way that this happens, and I honestly don't foresee that happening anytime soon. I would say maybe in 10 years, if that. In 10 years, I would say maybe if Bob Weinstein needs the money, or he's just done with the business and wants to sell all of his assets, then I could see possibly that he would do that and sell all the assets, and then maybe someone would then turn around and go, "Oh, look at Dogma. Oh, there's kind of this fan base here that might enjoy watching this. Why don't we re-release that and see what happens, and do a bare bones release and see what happens from there?" But yeah, unfortunately, and this is sad because people should be able to watch the movies that they want to watch. But because it's business and because of the toxicity of the Weinsteins, it's going to be a long time before that happens. So that sucks. But then again, if I had the money, I wouldn't buy it because I want to get my money back. And that's that pretty much. All right, so we are at the end of this episode. But before we go, we're going to talk about the next film that I'm going to watch for next week. I wanted to do some sports movies. We are now in the beginning of the NFL season. The season for baseball is coming to a close. Postseason is coming up. And sports movies are a weird type of film. These films, I think, in the film lovers and the film snobs like me, in that camp, they get short shrift. And they don't get as much respect as they should, because there are some damn good sports movies. And I'm looking at some right now, like Bend It Like Beckham. Bend It Like Beckham is a fantastic movie. Maybe not a quote-unquote great sports movie, but it's a good movie nonetheless. But there are, Tin Cup is another one, Bull Durham. There are some very good sports movies. And since Zero is still on his sabbatical, I thought I would go and watch some sports movies that basically I haven't seen, and just basically take that and take it off my watch list, essentially. So why don't I look at what we can watch here? You know what? Let's do this. I have heard so many times in my life that Hoosiers is a fantastic sports movie. And I think I'll jump on that. Next week, we will be discussing the movie Hoosiers, starring Gene Hackman and Dennis Hopper. I've heard nothing but great things about this movie, so it'll be interesting to watch this. So tune in next week where we discuss the movie Hoosiers, starring Gene Hackman and Dennis Hopper. I am The Wiz, and this is the Capital Games Movie Club. See you next week. Bye.